Hello and welcome to Serial Saturday. Today we are going to go over the serial killer Rodney James Alcala. He's known by other names, but let's dive into this. Born Rodrigo Jaquez Alcala, August 23rd, 1943. And if I say his name wrong from time to time, I don't care, he's a bad person. Rodney was born in San Antonio, Texas, the third of 4 children born to a Mexican-American couple, Raul Alcala Bucor and Ana Maria Gutierrez. I'm sorry if I'm saying their names wrong. Alcala's father moved the family to Mexico, then abandoned them 3 years later. 3 years later, in 1954, when Alcala was aged 11, his mother moved him and his 2 sisters to suburban Los Angeles. Alcala was an academically gifted student who was reasonably popular among his peers and was supported by his family. He attended various private schools during his youth before graduating from Cantwell Sacred Heart of Mary High School. He was on the yearbook planning committee and on the track and cross-country teams, seemingly to be a well-rounded individual. In 1961, at the age of 17, Alcala joined the United States Army to become a paratrooper and served as a clerk. During his service, he was noted by his commanding officer as being manipulative, vindictive, and insubordinate. Well, someone saw it, and I guarantee you it was happening at home and not said. Alcala was disciplined on several occasions for assaulting young women. In 1964, after what was described as a nervous breakdown, during which he went AWOL and hitchhiked from Fort Bragg, North Carolina, to his mother's house in California. Jesus, he went across the country. Alcala was diagnosed with antisocial personality disorder and estimated to have an IQ of 135 by a military psychiatrist. He was subsequently discharged from the Army on medical grounds. Other diagnoses later proposed by various psychiatric experts at his trials included narcissistic personality disorder, borderline personality disorder, and malignant narcissism with psychopathic and sexual sadism comorbidities. After being discharged from the Army, Alcala graduated from the UCLA School of the Arts and Architecture. He later studied film under Roman Polanski at New York University. Let's get into the criminal history. On September 25th, 1968, a passing motorist named Donald Haynes called police after witnessing Alcala lure Tally Shapiro, aged 8, into his Hollywood apartment. Shapiro, who was residing at the Chateau Marmont with her family, was approached by Alcala on her way to school when he pulled up beside her in his car and asked if she needed a ride. Shapiro initially refused, but when she heard him say that he knew her parents, she got into the car. Alcala then took her to his apartment, where he told Shapiro he wanted to show her a picture. When the police arrived, Shapiro was found alive in a pool of her own blood, having been graped and beaten with a steel bar. Thank goodness for that person who called the police and said something. They were a little late, but still. Alcala had fled. Shapiro was in a coma for 32 days and spent months in recovery. That poor girl. To evade the arrest warrant stemming from the Shapiro assault, Alcala, I'm just going to say he. I'm tired of saying his name. He left California and enrolled at New York University and enrolled at NYU using the name John Berger, spelled this way. And yes, it's important, the spelling. Cornelia Crilly, a 23-year-old Trans World Airlines flight attendant, was found raped and murdered in her Manhattan apartment on June 12, 1971. Alcala had strangled her with her own nylon stockings, leaving her dead in her apartment at 427 East 83rd Street. It is believed that Criley met him as she moved into her new apartment, and she accepted his help in moving some furniture. Her murder remained unsolved until 2011. FBI posters issued for Alcala circa 1971. In 1971, he obtained a job at a New Hampshire art camp, Camp New Beginnings, in the village of George Mills on Lake Sunapee. As a counselor for children, it's fucking shocking they don't do any kind of checks. As a counselor for children, I get that he's using an alias, but still. As a counselor for children using a slightly different alias, John Berger spelled this way, the FBI added him to its list of top 10 most wanted fugitives. A few months later, 2 campers at the art camp noticed his photo on an FBI poster at the post office. That August, Alcala was arrested and extradited to California. By then, Tally Shapiro's parents had relocated their entire family to Mexico and refused to allow Shapiro to testify at the trial. Without the primary witness, prosecutors were unwilling to charge him with rape and attempted murder. Dang it. He was instead convicted of child molestation, then a lesser charge, and sentenced to 3 years. 3 years for child molestation? He did more than that, but still. Jesus. Alcala was paroled in 1974 after 34 months. Less than 2 months after his release, he was rearrested and convicted for assaulting a 13-year-old girl identified in court records as Julie J., who had accepted what she thought was a ride to school. Same trick. Alcala was again paroled after serving 2 years and released in 1977 as a registered sex offender. Why wasn't he released as a registered sex offender the first time? Okay. After his second release in 1977, his Los Angeles parole officer made the unusual choice of permitting a repeat offender and known flight risk to travel to New York City. What? New York Police Department investigators now believe that a week after returning to Manhattan, Alcala killed Ellen Jane Hover, 23-year-old daughter of nightclub owner Herman Hover and goddaughter of Dean Martin and Sammy Davis Jr. Hover was last seen at her New York apartment on July 15, 1977. Her datebook showed that she had an appointment to meet with one John Berger the same day. Later in 1977, the FBI received a tip about Alcala's 1971 arrest in New Hampshire related to the Shapiro case in California. Alcala admitted to knowing Hover under questioning, but investigators could not arrest him since they had not found her body. Her remains were discovered in 1978, buried under heavy rocks on a hillside overlooking the Hudson River, near a location on the John D. Rockefeller estate. On the estate? Dang. Where an aspiring model would later report that Berger had taken photographs of her. In 1977, Alcala worked briefly at the Los Angeles Times as a typesetter. He was interviewed by members of the Hillside Strangler Task Force as part of their investigation on known sex offenders. Although he was ruled out as the Strangler, he was arrested and served a brief sentence for marijuana possession. During this period, he convinced hundreds of young men and women that he was a professional fashion photographer and took pictures of them for his portfolio. A Times co-worker later recalled that Alcala shared his photos with workmates. Quote, "I thought it was weird, but I was young. I didn't know anything," she said. When I asked why he took the photos, he said their moms asked him to. I remember the girls were naked. The hell? Leanne Leadham, who was 17 when Alcala photographed her in 1979, reported that, quote, "He said he was a professional, so in my mind I was being a model for him." Leadham further reported that the portfolio Alcala shared with her also included spread after spread of naked teenage boys. Ooh. In 1978, in the midst of his killing spree, he was a contestant on the popular game show The Dating Game. Host Jim Lang introduced him as a, quote, "successful photographer. Between takes, you might find him skydiving or motorcycling." Jed Mills, a fellow Bachelor contestant on the episode, later described him as, quote, "a very strange guy with bizarre opinions." Alcala won the competition and a date with the episode's Bachelorette, Cheryl Bradshaw, who subsequently refused to go out with him because she found him creepy. How do you win that? I've never seen it. On November 9th, 1977, Alcala murdered Jill Terry Barcombe, an 18-year-old girl from Oneida, New York, and disposed of her body on a dirt path near Mulholland Drive in Los Angeles. Barcombe was found in a knee-to-chest position and naked from the waist down. There were signs of SA, and she had been strangled with a pair of blue rope ties and beaten. She also had 3 bite marks on her right breast. Initially, authorities believed Barcombe was a victim of the Hillside Strangler. However, after the arrest of Kenneth Bianchi and Angelo Bueno, neither of whom confessed to or were convicted of her murder, authorities determined that her case was unrelated. On December 16, 1977, 27-year-old nurse Georgia Marie Wickstead was discovered dead in her Malibu apartment. She was last seen when she drove another nurse, Barbara Gale, home from a bar. When Wickstead didn't show up for work the next day, Gale and their co-worker reported her missing. Police arrived at her apartment to find signs of forced entry. Wickstead was posed naked on her bedroom floor, strangled with her own nylons. She had been SA'd, her skull had been bashed in, and her downstairs had been mutilated. Prosecutors later used DNA evidence and a handprint found at the scene to convict Alcala. On June 24, 1978, Charlotte Lee Lamb, a 32-year-old legal secretary from Santa Monica, was found dead in the laundry room of the apartment complex where she was living in El Segundo. She had been SA'd, beaten, and strangled with a shoelace, and was posed with her hands behind her back. DNA at the scene would match that of Alcala, and DNA on a pair of earrings found in his storage locker after Robin Kristen Samo's 1979 murder would eventually prove to match Lamb's DNA. On February 14, 1979, Alcala picked up a 15-year-old hitchhiker, Monique Hoyt, in Riverside County. He drove her to his apartment where he raped her. Then he traveled to a secluded mountainous area in Joshua Tree, California, where he took photos of her in her underwear as well as photos of him raping her again. He bound and gagged her and began a sustained assault, which included further rape and sodomy. Alcala bludgeoned Hoyt in the head with a rock, but Hoyt escaped when Alcala entered a gas station bathroom on the drive back to Riverside County. Hoyt filed a police report about her attack, and Alcala was arrested, but his mother posted bail. I'm telling you from the beginning that his mama was covering stuff up for him. I'm telling you. On June 13th, 1979, Jill Marie Parenteau, I don't know if I'm saying that right, a 21-year-old computer key punch operator, left work early to go to a baseball game. When she did not make it to work the following morning, police went to her Burbank apartment and found signs of forced entry. Parenteau was dead, naked on her bathroom floor. She was posed with pillows under her shoulders. She had been essayed, beaten, and strangled. Her killer cut himself crawling through a window, and blood evidence would later identify Alcala as the perpetrator. Parenteau's friend Catherine Brandt testified that she and Parenteau had met Alcala at a club several times before. On June 20th, 1979, Robin Christine Samso, a 12-year-old girl from Huntington Beach, disappeared as she rode a borrowed bicycle from the Huntington Beach home to her ballet lesson. Her decomposed body was found 12 days later in the Los Angeles foothills, dumped off Santa Anita Canyon Road. She had been beaten, raped, and stabbed with a knife. Samso's friends told police that a stranger had approached them on the beach asking to take their pictures. Detectives circulated a sketch of the photographer, and Alcala's parole officer recognized him. Alcala was arrested in July 1979 and held without bail, thank goodness. He went on trial for Samso's murder, was found guilty in May 1980, and sentenced to death in June. However, the verdict was overturned by the California Supreme Court in 1984 because jurors had been improperly informed of his prior sex crimes. In May 1986, after a second trial, virtually identical to the first except for omission of the prior criminal record testimony, he was again convicted and sentenced to death in August. In 1992, the California Supreme Court upheld the verdict, but Alcala filed a federal habeas corpus petition, and in 2001, a United States District Court judge granted it, overturning Alcala's second conviction. That decision was upheld in 2003 by a Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals panel, in part because a witness was not allowed to support Alcala's contention that the park ranger who found Samso's body had been hypnotized by police investigators. Okay. While preparing for their third prosecution in 2003, Orange County investigators learned that Alcala's DNA sample underwent a new state law over his objections, matched semen left at the grape murder scenes of two women in Los Angeles. Additional evidence, including another cold case DNA match in 2004, led to Alcala's indictment for the murders of 4 additional women. Jill Barcombe, 18, a New York runaway, found, quote, rolled up like a ball in a Los Angeles ravine in 1977, and originally thought to have been a victim of the Hillside Strangler, Georgia Wickstead, 27, bludgeoned in her Malibu apartment in 1977. Charlotte Lamb, 31, raped and strangled and left in the laundry room of the El Segundo apartment complex in 1978. And Jill Parenteau, 21, killed in her Burbank apartment in 1979. All of the bodies were found posed in carefully chosen positions. Another pair of earrings found in Alcala's Seattle storage locker had residue that matched Lamb's DNA. During his incarceration between the second and third trials, Alcala wrote and self-published a book, You, the Jury, in which he claimed innocence in the Samso case and suggested a different suspect. He also filed 2 lawsuits against the California penal system for a slip and fall incident and for refusing to provide him a low-fat diet. In 2003, prosecutors entered a motion to join the SAMHSA charges with those of the 4 newly discovered victims. Alcala's attorney contested it, as one of them explained, quote, "If you are a juror and you hear one murder case, you may be able to have reasonable doubt, but it's very hard to say you have reasonable doubt on all 5, especially when 4 of the 5 aren't alleged by eyewitnesses, but are proven by DNA matches," end quote. In 2006, the California Supreme Court ruled in the prosecution's favor, and in February 2010, Alcala stood trial on the 5 joint charges. For the 3rd trial, Alcala elected to act as his own attorney, because, he's a smart man and he just really knew what he was doing. He took the stand in his own defense and for 5 hours played the roles of both the interrogator and witness, asking himself questions and addressing himself as Mr. Alcala in a deeper than normal voice. The fuck? Followed by answering them. During this self-questioning, I can't believe they let it go on for 5 hours. During this self-questioning and answering session, he told jurors, often in a rambling monotone, that he was at Knott's Berry Farm applying for a job as a photographer at the time SAMHSA was kidnapped. He showed the jury a portion of his 1978 appearance on The Dating Game in an attempt to prove that the earrings found in the Seattle locker were his, not SAMHSA's. Jed Mills, the actor who competed against Alcala on the show, told a reporter that earrings were not yet a socially acceptable accoutrement for men in 1978. Quote, "I had never seen a man with an earring in his ear," end quote, he said. "I would have noticed them on him." Alcala made no significant attempt to dispute the 4 added charges, other than to assert that he had not remembered killing any of the women. As part of his closing argument, he played the Arlo Guthrie song Alice's Restaurant, in which the protagonist tells a psychiatrist that he wants to kill. After less than 2 days, the jury convicted him on all 5 counts of first-degree murder. A surprise witness during the penalty phase of the trial was Shapiro. Richard Rapport, a psychiatrist paid by Alcala and the only defense witness, testified that borderline personality disorder could explain Alcala's claim that he had no memory of committing the murders. The prosecutor argued that Alcala was a sexual predator who knew what he was doing was wrong and didn't care. In March 2010, Alcala was sentenced to death for a 3rd time. After his 2010 conviction, New York authorities announced that they would no longer pursue Alcala because of his status as a convict awaiting execution. Nevertheless, in January 2011, a Manhattan grand jury indicted him on the murders of Criley and Hover in 1971 and 1977. In June 2012, he was extradited to New York, where he initially entered not guilty pleas on both counts. In December 2012, he changed both pleas to guilty, citing a desire to return to California to pursue appeals of his death penalty conviction. On January 7, 2013, a Manhattan judge sentenced Alcala to an additional 25 years to life. The death penalty has not been an option in New York since 2007. In March 2010, the Huntington Beach, California, and New York City Police Departments released 120 of Alcala's photographs and sought the public's help in identifying them in the hope of determining if any of the women and children he photographed were additional victims. Approximately 900 additional photos could not be made public, police said, because they were too sexually explicit. In the first few weeks, police reported that approximately 21 women had come forward to identify themselves, and at least 6 families said they believed They recognized loved ones who, quote, disappeared years ago and were never found. None of the photos were unequivocally connected to a missing person case or unsolved mystery until 2013. 110 of the original photos remain posted online. And police, I couldn't find all 110, by the way. I'm putting up the ones that I found. And police continue to solicit the public's help with further identification. Most of the subjects remain unidentified. Police fear that some of the subjects may be additional cold case victims. Following Alcala's death in 2021, 68-year-old Morgan Rowan contacted Steve Hodel, one of the original investigators on the Shapiro case, and described being attacked by Alcala in July 1968, when she was only 16 years old. Rowan claimed that while she was living in Hollywood, she was approached by Alcala at a teen nightclub on the Sunset Strip and entered his car believing he would be driving to an IHOP restaurant. Instead, Alcala drove to his apartment a few blocks away, where he said he was having a party. When they arrived, Alcala dragged Rowan into his bedroom, barricaded the door, and then beat and raped her. Rowan was rescued by friends and acquaintances who broke into the room through a window. Alcala fled and Rowan was pulled from the apartment by her friends. Thank goodness for good friends. A little late again, but she's alive, so. In March 2011, investigators in Marion County, California, north of San Francisco, announced that they were confident that Alcala was responsible for the October 9, 1977 murder of 19-year-old Pamela Jean Lamson, who disappeared after making a trip to Fisherman's Wharf to meet a man who had offered to photograph her. Her battered, naked body was subsequently found in Marion County near a hiking trail. With no fingerprints or usable DNA, charges were never filed. The police claimed that there was significant evidence to convince them that Alcala committed the crime. In September 2016, Alcala was charged with the murder of 28-year-old Kristen Ruth Thornton. Thornton and her lover moved away from her family to live in San Antonio, Texas. After they split up in Biloxi, Mississippi in June 1977, she was last seen hitchhiking and was never heard from again. In 2013, an image made public by Huntington Beach Police Department and New York Police Department of a dark-haired woman riding a motorcycle while wearing a yellow shirt was recognized by Thornton's sister. Her body was found in 1982 near Granger, Wyoming, approximately 6 miles from Interstate 80, but was not identified until 2015 when DNA supplied by Thornton's relatives matched tissue samples from her remains. Alcala admitted taking the photo, but not to killing the woman, who was approximately 6 months pregnant at the time of her death. Thornton is the first alleged murder victim linked to the Alcala photos made public in 2010. The 73-year-old Alcala was reportedly too ill to make the journey from California to Wyoming to stand trial on the new charges. In 2010, Seattle police named Alcala as a person of interest in several unsolved murders in Washington state since Alcala had rented a Seattle area storage locker in which investigators later found jewelry belonging to 2 of his California victims in 1979. Other cold cases were reportedly targeted for reinvestigation in California, New York, New Hampshire, and Arizona. Cherry Ann Greenman, 20, was last seen in Waterville, Washington on September 14, 1976, after she was released from Douglas County Jail. A photograph found in Alcala's locker was shown to Greenman's family, and they confirmed it was not her. Antoinette Jean Whitaker, 13, was a student who had been living in a foster home when she walked out with an unidentified man on the night of July 9, 1977. A week later, her body was found fully clothed and propped up on her hands and knees in a vacant lot in Lake City, Seattle. She had been stabbed to death. There was no evidence that she had been SA'd. On February 17, 1978, Joyce Francine Gaunt, 17, was found at a picnic area at Seaward Park, Seattle. She was nude and laying on her face. Her skull had been crushed, and the developmentally disabled teen had also been beaten, strangled, and SA'd. She had been living in a group home on Capitol Hill when she was last seen leaving to meet with an unidentified man on February 16, 1978. These are cases that could be linked to him but were never fully linked to him. While on California's death row, Alcala died of a heart attack at a hospital in Kings County on July 24, 2021 at the age of 77. Prosecutors have said that Alcala, quote, toyed with his victims, strangling them until they would lose consciousness and then waiting for them to revive, sometimes repeating this process several times before finally killing them. One police detective described him as a killing machine, and others have compared him to Ted Bundy. I will again post all of the pictures of the women and girls that I was able to find. To my knowledge, these are women who he had taken photographs of but have never been identified. So if you happen to recognize one of the photos, let me know. This one bothers me a bit more than others because there are children that are involved, obviously. That's sick. And something... And I hate to say it, and this may seem cruel, but a heart attack seems a bit too kind of a way out for him. A man who just has spent his entire life manipulating people and hurting people. Anyways, thank you so much for watching. Have a good one.